Jackson's mistakes, and for Harrison's sakes. I am, as always, your host, Christopher Paul Dugdale, MEDMA. We are Duncanville High School in these United States, and today is November 3rd, 2020, and on this date in history, in 1903, the United States helped Panama get its independence from Colombia by using the Marines to block forces in, well, on the border of where Panama and Colombia are now, and using their Navy to keep from getting reinforcements by ship. So, happy beginning of Panama Canal Day. Now we move into one of the most accomplished people before they entered the presidency. It's hard to find someone who's more accomplished than Adams was, especially as a diplomat and Secretary of State. If you look for people that are qualified for the presidency, there are few people that are more qualified than he was going in. Because he was elected with a minority of the votes, one of the first things he tries to do is he appoints political opponents to his cabinet. Okay? So, political opponents to his cabinet. What else do I want to say? This is the same thing that George Bush did in 2001, whenever he actually took the oath of office. The goal was to appoint his political opponents so that he would seem fair, like he didn't cheat his way in. It ends up backfiring on both Bush and Quincy Adams. Also, John Quincy Adams couldn't handle being criticized, so that's really going to become a problem whenever you're president of the United States. Nothing was really passed during his time. Really no accomplishments at all. And, a miserable time as president. In fact, his father, who was still alive at the time whenever he was elected, who would die, so John Adams, the father, and Thomas Jefferson both died on July 4th, 1826, on the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Anyway, so just a little bit of fun there. Let's move into the dirtiest election in the history of the United States. That would be the election of 1828. Okay, John Quincy Adams was accused of bringing gambling into the White House. Okay, mainly because he had a billiard table or pool table and a chessboard. Okay, so he was seen as a real gambler. He was also accused by Jackson of being a pimp for the Tsar of Russia, and that he brought him several little virgin women to satiate his Russian Tsar needs, which, I don't know if that did happen, but that's not strange in diplomacy. Okay, so Andrew Jackson, on the other hand, is a man of the people. There were no shortages of horrible stories you could tell about him. All the duels he was in, he had 3 bullets that were permanently lodged in his body from duels that he had survived. He was an Indian fighter. He was cruel to slaves, the immigrants, and people that he thought they were better than him. He often would invite prostitutes to parties that he was invited to, just as a way of making things awkward. And while I find that a little bit funny, just who he is as a person, he deserved a lot of this. Now, one of the strange things, and remember this is 1828, was a newspaper reporter found out that Rachel Jackson, who was married to Andrew Jackson in 1793. Okay, so they'd been married together at this point for 35 years. Was actually married to 2 people for a short period of time. She was married first in 1789, and the man she was married to, they ended up getting a divorce in a short period of time, and they went their separate ways. And so for 3 years, she lived back with her parents. She didn't date anyone. Then she began to date Jackson. They got married rather quickly. They get married, and they're together almost a year. Whenever her first husband comes back and says, "Hey, I want a divorce," So at that point, she found out she was actually married to two men. Now, when the story's reported 35 years later, after 35 years after she married Jackson, it was basically reported that she was a slut that had some type of, you know, marriage to two men at the same time, like there was some type of weird sex thing for that time going on. But it couldn't be further from the truth that it was just more a miscommunication between her and her first husband, and women couldn't file for divorce, so I don't know that she even knew that she was married, to be honest. But that was such a cutting thing to Jackson that Jackson never forgave the newspaper editor who brought that up, and the newspaper editor was actually a friend of Henry Clay, so that made things even worse. And some people think that Henry Clay gave him the story. I'm not really sure, but it's still the fact. So the inauguration of 1828, a bunch of common people attended the election. Okay, Jackson was seen as a man of the people, as a common man, but again, he was nothing but, or he was anything but common. He was called Old Hickory because he was really tough, and he said that the federal government only benefited the rich, which was his way of doing things that benefited his friends. And well, anyway, the inauguration, he invited everyone to the White House, and it was said that some of the stains in the carpet were, still being cleaned out years later. There was a wheel of cheese that they had that was left in to rot, and the smell of that permeated the building for a couple of months. So it smelled like rotten cheese for a lot of the first year that he was in office. He took advantage and created something called the spoils system or patronage. Now, the truth was a lot of the government jobs being held were held by people who'd been in office for, since 1789. So at the point he takes office in 1829, it's been 40 years they've been in office, and you do need to change those out. But this creates a system that will be in place for about the next 60 years, and will actually lead to the death of a president because he doesn't follow the spoils system or patronage. And so this is giving government jobs to winners to the winning party. Okay, Jackson said, "To the winner goes the spoils," and so now all of your local government positions were now based on who they voted for. So if you were a mailman, and I'm not saying like a double man, but someone who delivered mail, you would be. I don't know what a double man would be, by the way. And please don't tell me. Please don't send me pictures. Please. Please. So anyway, that means your local mailman might be fired because he was not in the right political party. So that's all that means. Okay, so that's a spoil system and a patronage. So be ready. This will come up until really the end of January. So make sure you put that into your long-term memory slot. In fact, you'll still need to know that for the STAR exam too. So put that in your triple long storage memory. Okay, so the Battle of the Petticoats, or the PeggyEaton Affair. Okay, so Peggy Eaton was a lot like Rachel Jackson. Oh crap! I forgot to tell you this. So Rachel Jackson, everyone's calling her a slut. Well, right before Jackson took office, she died, and so this turns him to an even more bitter man at this point. And that's what makes this affair, this Peggy Eaton affair, all the while worse. So Peggy Eaton, she was married to a man, and he was out for a long time as a diplomat. Didn't take her with him, and she apparently told him that she was going to leave him for Mark Eaton, and who she later would marry. And whenever he found out this news that she was going to leave him and that she didn't love him and that she wanted to be with Mark Eaton instead, he killed himself, and she became a real pariah as a result of this. No one wanted to talk to her because she was the person who did not respect marriage. And by the way, there were a lot of men who didn't either, but how dare you, say something like that? And the news got out that she had done this. And so neither John C. Calhoun's wife, and Calhoun was the vice president for both John Adams and for Andrew Jackson. So once he found out that no one was letting her play in all the reindeer games, he demanded that everyone socialize with Peggy Eaton, and if not, they could resign. And so a lot of the cabinet members will resign as a result of this. Okay, probably not the best way to run your presidency. I think supporting someone despite things they did, that's not such a bad thing. But yeah, this really comes back to be a problem. The Tariff of Abominations. This increased the tariff on goods like clothing. This is really good for the North because of all the manufacturing, but the problem is people that were buying this were mainly in the South. So Southerners were helping pay for Northern industrialization. But nothing was done for the farmers in the South. Nothing was done to try and help them maybe get off a policy of slavery. So there's a lot of backlash that happens as a result of all of this. The Southerners see this as the government favoring the North over the South. And anyway, and the whole reason they have the tariff in the first place is to encourage you to buy Northern goods. But now they've made foreign goods so expensive and Northern goods are so expensive, so Southerners really can't afford to buy simple things like clothing or some of the tools that they need. Okay, so the South Carolina Exposition was written by the Vice President of the United States. And in this, he said, you know what? No one has to worry about any problems. What we're going to do is we're just going to nullify. You can cancel laws that your states don't like because they're also elected. But this also would completely destroy the power of the federal government. And being vice president, this is going to lead a major crisis to the point where Andrew Johnson says you can't do this, and if you try and do this, I'm going to send my army and I'm going to start hanging anyone who's trying to defy me, and I'll start with John C. Calhoun. And that was the kind of threat that was very serious, and very likely he would have hung Calhoun had he had the opportunity. So, anyway, cooler heads did prevail. No one was hung as a result of this. But this leads to Congress passing what's called the Force Act, or the Force Bill, which lets the president use the Army and Navy to collect tariffs when necessary. This is not something that's been put into place too many times, but that is an attempt to give more power to the federal government. Okay, so moving on. This is going to go to one of the more controversial things he does, and that's saying something whenever you have someone who's already got a few scandals under their belt, moving into scandal number 3 in the first 18 months that he's in office. Okay, and this is going to be the Indian Removal Act, and this requires major Indian tribes to move west of the Mississippi River to Oklahoma. Now, a lot of tribes had settled in and were peacefully coexisting with the American settlers. And their land was far better than the land of the American settlers because they actually took care of it and weren't raping the fields by planting the same thing over and over again, stripping them of all the minerals they needed to plant. So, some of Jackson's friends wanted the land, so he helped get a bill pushed through Congress that would make them abandon their land and let other people buy it, like Jackson's friends. So, as a result of this, the Black Hawk, which is a group of Indians, start a rebellion. Okay? And it's crushed by an army unit led by Jefferson Davis and Abraham Lincoln. So, by the way, those two guys are fighting side by side, only to be engulfed in the Civil War, 30 years later. Anyway, just kind of find that a little bit interesting. But this basically tells anyone that if you try and keep from moving, then we will have all of you killed. So the Cherokee try something a little bit different, and in the court case of Worcester versus Georgia, the Cherokee sued the government saying that their land was protected by treaties. John Marshall heard their argument and said, you know what, 100%, this is your land, so it's not a problem. Andrew Jackson at that point said, you made your ruling, now enforce it. And what this does is this really cripples the power of the Supreme Court for really up until the early 1900s. If you were president and you didn't like what the Supreme Court ruled, then you could just completely ignore it. And as a result of this, you have the Trail of Tears, where 15,000 Native Americans were marched under gunpoint, and 4,000 of them will die in the 116-day trip. It was really quite brutal. There's stories of people being beaten to death with the butts of rifles because they weren't worth the cost of a bullet. And if that sounds harsh, then you were paying attention. The election of 1832 was a pivotal election in the history of the United States. There are three major firsts that happened for the first time. Number one of these is the first National Nominating Convention, or the caucus system. Now, we have the direct primary now, but at that point, congressional party members chose presidential nominees. So for the first time, you have some type of selection process to see who gets to run for office. Number two, the National Republicans, they put together a political platform. So it's the first time you ever really knew what each political party stood for. While you might have, if you followed, Jackson or Hamilton or Jefferson or Adams closely enough, you could find out what the party was all about. But in this case, they had it published. So you have a caucus system, the first political platform, and then number three, you have the Anti-Masonic Party. This is the first third party in the history of the United States. To be honest, our nation would be a better place if there were three major parties instead of just two, so you'd have a little bit more variety instead of just one or the other. William Morgan was going to expose everything about the Freemasons, but mysteriously he disappeared. But he was going to say, what secret societies were up to, or the Freemasons, and he disappeared. A lot of people suspect foul play, but what I'm really hoping happened is a magician made him disappear, and he pops up in 3 days. He probably was killed, though. Jackson ended up replacing Calhoun with Martin Van Buren because he just despised John C. Calhoun. So that was the whole purpose behind him doing that. The bank wars further divided Jackson from what was going on in the nation. See, Jackson thought that the second Bank of the U.S. only made the rich richer. Although it gave us a stable money supply, it made it so that it was easier to trade from state to state. Really, the stable money supply is extremely important, and it causes major problems whenever it's not there. But Jackson decided to declare war on the Bank of the U.S. because Henry Clay wanted to push through its rechartering so that it would be, in play for the next 20 years. And the person that was in charge of the Bank of the U.S. was Nicholas Biddle, who was a close friend of Henry Clay. So Jackson vetoed a bill that would extend the Bank of the U.S., and then he removed all the government's money from the bank and moved it to banks owned by his friends. These are called pet banks. And so all the national funds from the Bank of the U.S. goes to these pet banks owned by Jackson's friends, which makes them into multi-millionaires. They didn't get to keep the money, but they did get to loan it out, and that they were able to make it grow and become really wealthy. So in a very short period of time, Jackson takes a working financial system in the Bank of the U.S. and cripples the U.S. economy. Now, it doesn't fall apart during his presidency, but it ruins the presidency of Martin Van Buren, his vice president, and the president that follows him. So this is all just kind of a power grab, and another way where Jackson does things to make his friends happy and wealthier, and screws over the American people. So it'll actually be about 25 years before there's another Bank of the U.S. So anyway, the divorce bill was shortly after the whole bank wars, and all the money was put into Jackson's friends' banks. And This was meant to get the U.S. permanently out of the banking business. So from this point forward, the U.S. operated basically an independent treasury system, where it paid all of its gold and all of its debts in gold and silver, and money was stored in regional vaults. And that's a very inefficient way of running a federal government, because if all that gold and silver is doing is sitting in those vaults and you're not lending it out, you're not growing it. So this does things to further retard the growth of the U.S. economy. Also, speculation has been a major problem in U.S. history, because you have a lot of people trying to buy and sell land cheaply or quickly for a profit. And what happens is someone's always footed with the bill, and this either can cause a bank to fail, if there's enough of these, or enough people to go bankrupt, that it hurts the local economies. Further complicating matters was that at this point, the only way you could buy land was with gold and silver, because there's no national currency, so everything's done through state and local banks, and that just causes even more issues, because most of the people that were trying to buy land didn't have the gold and silver to buy land. So it just concentrates all the land and all the transactions in the hands of the wealthy that have gold and silver. So during this time period, the Whig Party has started to oppose Jackson and his financial policy. Okay, this is how childish and stupid the United States is at this time. On the one hand, you have the Democrats, who are really against Jackson and Clay, and then the other major political party is the one that is just against Andrew Jackson. Okay, so they saw him as King Andrew, and this is named after the Whig Party from England. So, anyway, we'll talk more about what the Whig Party accomplishes, or really doesn't accomplish, very shortly. So, moving. So in 1836, Jackson destroys. Well, he did destroy, but Jackson decides he's not going to run for a third term. Again, they follow the precedent set by Washington. The only person that tries to run for a third presidential term is Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And actually, I guess you could say basically that Theodore Roosevelt did that too, although he just ran twice. So, anyway, so just because of how popular Jackson was, Van Buren wins. And he is the last former vice president to be elected from that position to the presidency until 1988, when George Herbert Walker Bush is elected. Now, you have people that move into that position and are reelected whenever a president's assassinated, but as far as going from being vice president to president, you don't really have that in that time period. In the Panic of 1837, this is something that comes with the close of the Bank of the U.S. This all really starts from England, whenever two major British banks are closed, and when the news hits here in the United States, between there being no Bank of the U.S. to really stabilize the money supply, and hearing that the two most powerful banks in Britain closed, it does enough to start a panic. And as you can see in the map in the bottom left-hand corner, is as it's moving down the coast, just the news, you have just wave after wave of banking, to the point where you've got around 230 banks that close in about 3 months. And all of this follows, the closing of these British banks. So this is going to cause a lot of farmers to lose their land. Unemployment goes crazy. And a lot of this you can blame on Jackson, because it was his financial policies that led them in this direction. So, anyway, sorry if the scream got you, but, it's a panic, and I need to set the mood right. Let me introduce everyone to the continuation of Republican motherhood, and that's a cult of domesticity. And this is an attempt at the male population to keep the women from having more of a role society, and what their main job to do then is to serve as the religious and moral leaders of the home. So you may not get to vote, but you help develop the next generation of voters, and so you get to vote through your sons and through your daughter's husbands who influence their husband, and you get to influence your own husband, and that's how you have equal rights in America. And you're the religious and moral leaders, so you affect how people are as they grow up, and also the kind of rules that we have to follow at home. Many women saw this as a type of slavery for women, and whenever you don't have any rights, you can try and sugarcoat it all you want, but the truth is, you're not doing anything but delaying the inevitable and just causing problems for yourself. So anyway, I'm going to move on to the election of 1840. Van Buren really has ruined any chances he has of re-election because of what the economy is going through. So the Whigs try and put out the candidate who looks most like Andrew Jackson, and that's William Henry Harrison. And William Henry Harrison did run against Van Buren in 1836, so they're giving another shot at him. But, you do have someone who's legitimately a hero. He's won two major battles, in the Battle of Tippecanoe and the Battle of the Thames. And so this is what they do to try and make him look like a better candidate. He's got John Tyler running with him, who becomes a very important president for some of the things he does while he's in office. And so their slogan is Tippecanoe and Tyler too. But there's a lot of shots being fired back and forth, and they make fun of Harrison, and they call him a Granny General or a phony Jackson, like he's not a real man, like he's not a real general. And in making this type of in making this kind of character attack on William Henry Harrison, Harrison feels compelled to prove that he is not a granny general, this wimpy general. So he goes out and he gives a speech for 90 minutes in the pouring rain and ice, to the point where he's about to freeze to death, and he catches pneumonia and dies. The ultimate cause of death is giving a speech. So this is kind of where we're looking right now at the United States and at our leadership. So be that as it may, we made it through yet another day. Next class, we will be exploring what happens when your president dies, even something from as tragic as giving a speech. So I'll see y'all soon. Have a great day, and try not to do things that are illegal that get you put into prison. So just try not to.